Welcome to the Adapt or Die podcast. This podcast explores ideas related to self-growth, finding meaning, and living a more fulfilled lifestyle. It's your host, with the most, Armel Tala.
And it's your host, on the low, Ben Smith. We're two college students on our own path of lifelong learning with the hope that you will join us in our journey. And now, it's time for the next episode of
The Adapt or Die podcast. Welcome back to another episode. This time, more psych, but a different psych book. Last book was like, for me, it was very I felt like I learned a lot, but at the same time, it really just impacted, like my life, the way I viewed the world.
Yeah.
This book is just really nice because it's like I'm learning a lot, and I feel like I know exactly how to apply it or how to like think about it.
That's your system one talking. There's plenty more to understand. But no, for sure. This book is a little not as deep as 12 Rules for Life in the sense like it's not as profound, I would say, but it's very enlightening in a lot of aspects, but much more for like small talk, like how you perceive things.
I think it's
cool. Things like that. I don't know, it's cool.
I think it's bigger because, real quick before the book is, I almost said 12 Rules for Life. This book that we're talking about today for the next 4 episodes again is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And shout out to Amos
Tversky.
Amos Tversky, shout out. Nobel Prize. We're reading a Nobel Prize winner book right here. So very knowledgeable. But yeah, now this book to me, it's about making decisions and how you make the flaws in your decision making. And like, if you want to work in like management or like, top executives making decisions, and this is a really good book.
Yeah, this is a great book.
So with all that being said, what's the roadmap, Ben?
So like Mel said, we're reading Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Today we're going to be going over his 2 systems, which are System 1 and System 2, going over some basic biases, heuristics, and basic judgment errors. And they're pretty interesting, so they've been coming hard and fast, though. They'll be pretty rapid fire, so be ready for that. But with that being said, Armel, take it away.
Let's go. So 2 systems of thinking. System 1, and this is the thinking fast part of the title, and this part of your brain operates automatically, quickly, with little effort, and you don't have any control of it. It just happens. This is like you recognizing someone's mad or you just eating and sleeping, right? And System 2 is the slow thinking. This is thinking that is more deliberate. It's like what focuses on like the computation. It allocates attention and it focuses on retrieving memory, and it's where this is this part of your brain that you use to make important decisions and concentration. So an example would be like real simple but when you're computing 17 times 24, when you're computing 2 times 2, that's more System 1, very quick. Your brain knows that. But System 2, 17 times 24 will activate it. Some good examples, the way to think about it is recognizing emotion is System 1. Thinking why someone is having that emotion, now that's System 2. Intuitive guesses, if someone's like guess between 150 to 600, that's System 1. And then computations, like what math, anything above something simple, would be System 2.
So to go a bit deeper, just to give y'all a really good intuitive feeling for System 1 and System 2, System 1 would also include things that we are born to do, so seeing, feeling, hearing, things like that. And it's also activities that become automatic through prolonged practice. So that's a lot of times that's like reading a simple sentence, driving, things that are very habitual for you. A lot of these actions from System 1 are involuntary, so maybe like breathing, it's involuntary, but it can be taken over control by System 2 if you wanted to. So they're kind of like dual functions there. Like some things are System 1 default, but then System 2 when you want them to be. Some more examples of System 1 are orienting to the source of a sound, 2 plus 2 equals 4, reading words on a large billboard, and detecting that one object is more distant than another object. That's all System 1. System 2, again, these are things you must concentrate and really think about. System 2 is also who you think of as yourself. So your thinking conscious self, that's your System 2 perception of yourself. Like I said earlier, some things can be taken over by System 2 from System 1. And often System 2 can program things to become System 1. For instance, if you played basketball for a long time, um, if your shot's good enough, it's System 1. Like it's automatic, it's habitual. If you haven't played for a while, then it's going to be System 2 because you'll still have to think about form and things like that. So some final examples for System 2 would be focusing on a certain voice in a crowded room, counting the occurrences of the letter A in a page of text, comparing two washing machines for overall value, and filling out a tax form.
You see how he's trying to attack me here? But a couple important things to remember. System 1 and System 2 don't actually exist. They're useful fictions, like fictional characters in a way. You give them a personality, I guess. Like, don't think that, oh, my left brain and right brain, it's not actually like that. There's a whole mix of things in your brain that actually works, and it's a lot more complicated than that. But it's Daniel uses this to help us understand, because we are animals that understand things through stories and narratives and everything. So, and the way to actually think about it in the story term is like System 2 is a supporting character that believes they're the hero of all the decision making you make in your life. So they think they're the main character in the story. Defining characteristics are operations are effortful, but system 2 is lazy and oftentimes won't do anything that is not necessary. Now, System 1, this is actually the center of the story, the center of most of your decision making. And System 2 often thinks ideas of System 1 are its own, and it mostly just relies and justifies the answers given by System 1 without really putting any effort.
So now that we kind of have defined System 1 and System 2 and given some context about them, now we get to get to some good stuff. So the first thing we want to talk about is the gorilla experiment, and this kind of gives a really good idea of um, how focused you can be and how scarce your attention is. So basically, they did an experiment. They created this video. It was two teams playing basketball, and they told participants to watch the basketball being passed from teammates to teammates for a couple minutes. In the middle of the video, a person in a big gorilla suit comes out, and in the middle of the screen, pounds their chest for like 10 seconds, and then leaves the video. And what's astonishing is that even though the gorilla, like it's not like the gorilla's far away, it's like in the middle of the screen. The person in the gorilla costume, 50% of experimenters or 50% of participants in the experiment don't even notice the gorilla on the screen because they're so focused on the basketball. Their attention is so kept by the basketball that they don't even see the gorilla. And then they're astonished the second time they watch the video and they're told about the gorilla. They're astonished they didn't see it. And some people think that they're two different videos, but they are, in fact, the exact same. But again, the point of that story is to show you how limited your attention is. And when you focus on something, a lot of times that takes up pretty much the entirety of your universe.
One of the first habits that Daniel defines is the law of least, not habit, but kind of the way we think and the way we approach thinking, is the law of least effort, right? And this might be able to explain a little bit about the gorilla, but the law of least effort is if there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. Ben says this explains Parkinson's law. Could you quickly elaborate on that?
Oh, just like Parkinson's law is work expands to fill the time available. So it's like if you can spend more time doing something, you will because that's the easier of the two courses of action. That's how I rationalized it.
That makes a lot of sense. So you might be asking, well, when do we exert the greatest amount of mental effort? Effort is commonly needed for to maintain. Oh, effort is commonly needed to maintain several ideas that require separate actions or need to be combined according to a rule. An example here is like rehearsing a shopping list while you're at the store, or choosing between like fish or veal at a restaurant and doing complex math. There's a lot of things there you're balancing in your brain at once. It's not that the task itself is difficult, because you might say, well, keeping track of like a shopping list isn't that hard, it doesn't seem, but what your brain is doing is actually exerting a lot of effort to maintain all those things at the same time. And then one of the ways, like physical ways you can tell that you're actually really using your system too, is like look at your pupils. They will dilate, which like they'll get larger as you're like actually exerting a lot more mental effort.
Now, one of the cool things, or one of the interesting things, is that self control is actually a huge part of System 2. So, in terms of mental effort, exerting self discipline or self control is the same as trying to like it's the same as like trying to solve like a hard math problem. Like it's very energy expensive. I guess it requires a lot of mental work. And so an example would be like if you're trying to walk at a faster pace than normal, you actually have to concentrate on that. Like if you stop concentrating on that, you'll find that your pace is going to slow like naturally. It's kind of interesting. Um, Now, the where it gets really interesting is that when people are exerting mental effort or self-control, because it is similar to like a cognitive task, it diminishes over time. And the example they give was judges. They studied judges and their tendency to grant parole requests, and they found that the average, like if you are um, requesting parole, you have like a 35% chance of success. But if you happen to get assessed right after the judge ate lunch, your chances go to like 65%, and that's simply because they just ate, they have more energy, so they have more.
It took a break.
Yeah, they took a break, like have more energy to expend and really think about the case, and that gives them uh, they're more prone to say yes, whereas once they're tired, they're like, I'll just say no just because they're tired and they don't want to think about it that much, right? The one exception to this rule, where self-control is diminished, is a state of flow. We've talked about flow in The Art of Impossible, but it's basically a state where you don't feel time kind of disappears. Everything is very easy for you to go through, and you're not expending any effort on self control. All of your mental resources are going towards the task at hand. It's a beautiful state. We need to learn more about it.
And this explains why what is it? Willpower is limited because you truly are exhausting mental effort.
Hmm.
Well, now I want to point out to you guys, we are not as smart and we are not as, independent as we think. We are easily manipulated. And to start off how we are is a thing called priming. Any inputs into our brain, even unconscious ones, produce associations, even especially things we aren't actively thinking about, and these are also unconscious. So like if I say banana, there's going to be a lot of things that might pop into your mind, like yellow fruits and other things associated to it. For me, it's oatmeals. It's oatmeal because I have my oatmeal with banana in the morning. And so because our brain is very associative, the priming effect is really powerful. So if me and you were talking about food or eating and I said, okay, what word do you think of when that begins with an S and ends with a P? You'll probably say soup. Now if me and you were talking about being clean and, brushing our teeth or something. And I said, what word starts with S and ends with a P? You might say soup. You might not soup. You might say soap, right? So this is kind of how priming affects our brains, and associations prime our brains for very certain connections.
Now, the application goes much deeper than we even realize. We wouldn't think that this effect has much weight in our decision making, but it actually is far more than we realize. They've studied voters, and voters are much more likely to support increased fundraising for education when they're voting at a school, right? Because the association of being at a school primes them to vote for increased funding for education. Another more interesting one was in studies when people they were primed with a money background on a computer screensaver. So there was kind of dollar bills floating in water. And then through the experiment, they kind of validated a few different things. One was that people who are primed with money were more independent. They spent twice as long trying to solve a difficult problem, so they're more their perseverance was greater, and they were also more selfish. So they spend less time helping other students who were quote unquote pretending to be confused about experimental tasks. So small priming effects actually have a huge they actually have huge consequences on our decision making, much more than we realize. And this can be anything that's random in our environment. So it's pretty crazy.
And so priming can be associated to this idea called cognitive ease. And so what cognitive ease is, your brain easily understands. Cognitive ease is when your brain easily understands and solves a problem. Now there's a thing called cognitive strain, and this is when you're using a lot of mental effort and it requires you to really think through and understand a problem before you solve it. So some examples are sentences that have been repeated and printed in clear and I cannot talk. Sentences that have been repeated and printed in clear fonts are much easier for you to read and everything like that. That's cognitive ease, right? And then so sentences in poor fonts, faint colors, and complicated language that will produce cognitive strain. And this isn't just like one or the other. It's not binary. These can actually kind of happen at the same time. Certain things will trigger ease and strain. So don't think about it as binary.
Now, the crazy part about cognitive ease and strain is that we often confuse cognitive ease with truth, and that we base how true we think something is on how cognitively easy it is for us to grasp or understand something, or how familiar it is for us. Um, Studies have found that uh, words and phrases that we are more familiar with or that have been repeated more are judged as more likely to be true. He makes a side tangent that authoritarian governments and marketers have always known this fact because by pushing through media, you can connect, like, really control what people think is true and important. Another way is that sources are deemed more credible when they are easier to pronounce. I thought that was pretty interesting. But he makes another point that things don't even need to be repeated in their entirety to be thought of to alter someone's perception of truth. And the example he gives is participants hearing that, quote, the body temperature of chicken, end quote. They heard that statement like 3 or 4 times, and then they were much more likely to think that, quote, the body temperature of chicken is 144 degrees, end quote. So it's like they only heard the first part of that sentence, but they were more apt to believe that the chicken, like the average body temperature of a chicken, is 144 degrees, even though that's just a random number. Like, it doesn't even mean anything.
And to tie cognitive ease and illusion of truths, like priming is the way you think about it, is when you're hearing things over and over, or we talk about eating and stuff, that kind of prime, it makes your brain a lot easier to make the connection to the word soup when I say what starts with S and ends with P. But now something we all kind of understand is how our mood affects our decision making. And mood has obviously profound effects on our systems, especially on system one, because obviously when you're in a bad mood, you tend to make poor decisions. When you're in a good mood, you make good ones. In a study, people in a good mood double their accuracy in some simple intuition tests. People with in a poor mood were no better than random at simple intuition tests. So good mood, intuition, creativity, gullibility, and reliance on system one are generally associated with each other. Sadness, vigilance, suspicion, analytical approach, increased effort, and reliance on system two generally go together. And as such, happy mood produces more like creative and intuitive thinking, but you are more prone to errors whenever you're relying heavily on your system one.
Now, a main function of System 1 is what we think of as norms or normality. So, your System 1 is extremely good at detecting things that are abnormal to your daily experience. For instance, if I said the Earth revolves around the trouble every year, you'd be like, your brain just like trips. You're like, trouble, wait. Like, that's something you learn to like be surprised at, right? Because you've never heard that sentence structure. That's not normal. But we also reshape our norms extremely quickly. So an example he gives is if you see a bad car crash at a certain location, if you saw another car crash at that same location later, you'd be much less surprised to see it there because you've already seen it there once. So our system one is very good at recognizing norms and also surprises, because the flip side, and also very good at updating our norms extremely quickly.
I was not paying attention because I was finding a good quote. But so, what are we on?
Causality.
Causality. That's my fault.
We're good. We're good.
All right, guys. So, creating causality. Bit of a brain freeze, system one, system twos, we're working on two different things right there. But we are always looking for a cause and effect, a simple explanation to explain why something happened. So an example from this Nassim Taleb's book, which we'll be reading soon, The Black Swan, when Saddam Hussein was captured. And when Saddam Hussein was captured, it was announced like bond prices instantly rose, and the Bloomberg headline read, "U.S. Treasuries rise. Hussein cap- Hussein capture may not curb terrorism," right? Half an hour later, the Bloomberg article headline was U.S. Treasuries fall. Hussein captures boosts allure of risky assets. So the point here is that many times there is no explanation to things, but yet we still try to like find them and find like attribute causes to events that happen. And we are born this way. One, it's just like would be very it's advantageous. It's very helpful when you're talking about surviving, and just kind of how the world works. When you see one thing hit another, it's like a cause and effect, right? And so as humans, humans that are able to actually like understand and are very well at predicting and understanding causality are able to like better predict where crops are growing, animals are coming from, and all different type of things that just help you survive.
Now, some effects of the fact that we're more prone to look for causality is that we readily see and understand agents. And agents is, you can think of this as personification, but I guess an example would be like if you saw a short cartoon with a circle, a square, and a rectangle, and they were each given personalities, you'd easily be able to say, oh, like the square is a bully, like the triangle is a pushover, right? Like you're easily attributing certain attributes to a square or a rectangle, but those are just shapes. Like they don't actually, like, it's not a person, right? So you easily associate agents as a cause of something or having certain traits. Another thing is we tend to attribute history to a few like big causes, but actually history is much more affected by random processes and things that maybe, maybe the president was primed for a certain decision and that created a decision that, we all think he was a genius for, but maybe he just like happened to make that decision that day. It would have been different if he was making that decision a different day. And then the last thing he talks about is we often apply causal thinking when we should be applying statistical thinking. And we're going to talk more about this throughout the book because it's a pretty big idea. But one of the big things is correlation doesn't equal causation, but trying to parse those two apart and not apply causal thinking when we should be applying statistical thinking, which are very different. That's a huge source of bias and error within our decision making.
Trust me, I took probability and it is hard. That class is a different type of thinking, and I thought I was good at math. So we understand how we are easily manipulated, but we all know this, like that good partner that we have in a relationship, they may just be jumping to conclusions, and that's what we do as humans. Our brains are very good at jumping at conclusions. This is because if you're able, the way you think about it is if you can make a prediction and it's right most of the time, and that saves you energy, mental energy, then you will probably want to take that path. And especially if you do miss and it's like very minimal like cost for you missing that, then you'll probably do it. So that's why our brain does it. We often jump to conclusions. We don't even realize we did it a lot of times, and you don't really have and your brain doesn't really keep the different options in mind. An example here is like, so a sloppy 13, right? The number 13 written, but if you put that by A and then you put it A and then the 13 and then a C, you'll read it A, B, C without even realizing it.
And so one bias that's pretty common when we jump to conclusions is called the confirmation bias. So a lot of times when we're asked a question, we just search for the affirmative of the question instead of also looking for a negation of the question. So an example would be like if someone's like, "Yo, like, what's your friend Armel like? Is he pretty friendly?" And then I think, is Armel friendly? Okay. And then I'm searching for affirmative. I'm like, okay, how many times, what's my cognitive ease of thinking of Armel as a friendly dude? For me, it's pretty high. So I'm like, yeah, Armel's definitely friendly. But one thing I don't consider is uh,
One
the
time
opposite.
I punched a baby. I'm kidding. I did not do that.
Maybe he's not getting, I don't know. But the thing we don't look for is the negation. Like, like Mel said, like when were times that he wasn't friendly, and we often don't take that into account. So this is called the confirmation bias because we're seeking affirmation for a question that we were asked, and then we affirm it by seeing if we have enough positive scenarios, basically. And a lot of times that leads us to say yes or exaggerate scenarios when we shouldn't.
Another bias we have is called the halo effect. And the halo effect is the tendency to like or dislike everything about a person. So you might find one thing about this person nice and interesting, so therefore you're gonna think everything else about them is. So if you approve of a president, it's probably because you like their voice and their appearance. And if you think someone is attractive, and this is something that me and Ben actually found really interesting, is if you think someone is attractive, you're more likely to attribute positive traits to them, like generosity and fun, right? So again, looks kind of do matter. I know it's all right. Glow up is going to happen someday for all of us. So, but due to the halo effect, first impressions matter a lot, like a lot. And this is why people keep stressing this because they anchor a person's point of view. And a way to think about this, and an example is in school, is like your first assignment graded by a teacher anchors your teacher's point of view on you. So if you do really good on your first assignment, then they might think any mistakes you do following might just be due to some other causes. But if you do bad, they're going to assume that's just who you are.
Now, one thing that kind of links a lot of these biases and heuristics is this idea that what you see is all there is. And he talks about this. He mentions this like it feels like every other page at some points in the book. So
Because
it's
it's so
pretty significant.
powerful.
It is powerful, but essentially what it is that we give undue weight to information that we have over information that we don't have. This is particularly true of System 1. And it makes sense because if you don't have any information, your system one doesn't say, "Oh, like I'm missing this information." Like your system one just takes the information it has, and then it uses that to come up with some conclusion. It doesn't take into account information that doesn't exist. So an example would be if I said, Mindique is an intelligent and strong person. Would she be a good leader? Now you're inclined to say yes, but there are so many more factors that make someone a good leader. Like, what if she's selfish and corrupt, or what if she's not very good at speaking, or what if she's not, it's like, what if she's not inspirational? It's like all these things. It's like, yeah, she's might be more prone to be a good leader, but the proper answer is really I don't know because you have essentially no information about it, right? Uh, uh, you need to be intelligent to be a good leader, but that's not like the biggest factor or the most important thing there. So another thing is that what you see is all there is compounded by how lazy your system two is. So your system two is like, system one gave me this answer, sweet, I'm gonna roll with it. Let me just justify that, endorse that, and then like I'm out. So it's like what you see is all there is a huge and important effect because you're not taking into account information that you don't have.
And another thing that we are good at is basic assessments, right? We're very good at immediately assessing two characteristics about a person, like how dominant and thus how threatening someone is, and then how trustworthy that person is. And these are very good for survival and affects you. The effect that this has is especially on voting. So people were asked to rate candidates by their physical attributes, physical features like likability and competence. And 70% of the races, the winner was the one who earned their highest rating for competence than their opponent. So you can kind of see how this directly affects the real world.
Now, another fact is this will be important when Armel explains substitution, but this is called intensity matching. So essentially, what we do is we're very good at transferring the intensity of attributes, people, things between attributes, people, and things. So a good example of this is if I said that Julie could read fluently when she was 4 years old, and then I asked you, how tall is a man who's as tall as Julie is smart? For most of us, that's actually pretty easy. You might, ballpark in the range of, like 6 foot to 6'5", something like that. Like, that she's very smart for her age. Definitely on the high side, but even the 90 percentile, something like that, 95. But she's not insane, right? She's not 7 feet. She's not wildly away from the rest of the crowd. But it's very easy to match the intensity of how fluent she was reading to then extrapolate to how smart she was, and then extrapolate that to how tall a man would be based on the same like distribution. So interesting stuff there that we're able to intensity match things so well.
And this ties into a really important aspect of our life, and that's answering difficult questions. And so then Daniel introduces this idea called substitution. And this substitution occurs when we are having to answer an important question that is difficult for us to answer, right? And it's like you're asked, what is the meaning of life? What is happiness? And a lot of times we don't actually directly answer that question. We answer a simpler question like, what is my mood today? And some more examples, the way to think about it is you're asked like how much would you contribute to saving dolphins, right? Instead of you answering that question directly, because that is a lot more intricate and complex, you answer how how much do I like how much emotion do I feel towards thinking about dolphins dying. And or another one is like how should financial advisors who prey on the elderly be punished. The question you actually answer is how much anger do you have towards like financial predators, right? And so once you answer this easier question, you kind of, again, tying it back, you intensity match the first one. And so the way I think about it is like, if you really on a scale like 0 to whatever, and you're like, I really feel like a 9 about, it hurts a lot, of thinking about dolphins dying. Therefore, you're going to take that and be like, okay, well, if I'm thinking a 9, then you probably maybe assess like, well, how much is everybody else paying? And then you probably lean towards more the higher because you said your feeling is very high towards, um, dolphins dying, right? So substitution is extremely common and is the most common method for us to answer difficult questions. So next time that you're faced with a difficult question, like one, question if you are actually answering the right question, and two, think it out more.
Now, a really interesting experiment done based on substitution was a German experiment done about happiness. And so, what they did is they had two groups of people. So, in the first group, they asked individuals, the first question they asked was, how happy are you these days? And then the second question they asked was, how many dates did you have in the past month? So the order there is important because when they asked how happy you are versus how many dates you had in the past month, how happy you are was first, and how many dates you had in the past month was second. The correlation between the two questions was zero. But then they reversed the order for the second group. They asked people, how many dates have you had in the past month? And then they asked them how happy they are. And the correlation was about as high as psychological correlations ever get. I think it was like 60% or something, which is very significant. So the kind of analysis or why that's interesting is because people were correlating to a very high degree how many dates they'd gone on in the past month to their happiness, even though in the first scenario they didn't do that because they weren't asked that before. So that's an example of priming, association. Also, what you see is all there is, because people are thinking pretty much exclusively about the dates that they had been on, and then making that pretty much their assumption of how happy they've been the past month, even though that's pretty preposterous. Actually, it doesn't really make that much sense. So
The way we work is very interesting. And the last thing that Daniel Kahneman introduces is the effect heuristic. And so the effect heuristic is people let their likes and dislikes affect and determine their beliefs about the world. So your emotional attitude towards maybe like inorganic food, red meat, or something will more directly drive your beliefs about their benefits and risk. And your beliefs can change. So if you find new information suggesting lower risk for something, you immediately associate that thing with higher benefits, even though the benefits that were introduced did not change. So this becomes very important in political beliefs. Many people believe things based on how they feel about something and not actually the statistics about those things. Wow. That was a lot of information,
that was a lot of information.
but very direct. I hope you guys were like, wow, you questioned the way you thought for a second, because when I first heard it, I was like, yo, I got to question the way I'm thinking over here.
For sure. I'm gonna give you all a quick recap because we covered a lot, and I just want to give you a quick synopsis of everything. So we have our definition. System one is your automatic, habitual, very instinctual, intuition thinking. System two is like your conscious. That's who you think of as yourself. It's your critical thinking. Um, and so a few important things are that your attention is very scarce, very limited, as shown by the gorilla experiment. The law of least effort says that you will choose the easiest path forward given options. Your self control is a big part of system two and can be diminished over time, so your willpower is lost throughout the day. Priming can actually be kind of a huge effect on your decision making. Even simple random things around your environment can easily affect your decisions. Cognitive ease also has a huge effect. So, how familiar or when words have been repeated, that makes them easier to come to mind, and you're more likely to say things are true, even if they aren't. We're very good at recognizing norms and surprises. We often jump to conclusions for causality. So, we want to make things causal because that's how we understand the world. Wow, there's a lot here, isn't there? There's confirmation bias by searching for the affirmative, the halo effect that you associate good things with everyone or bad things. You like or dislike everything about a person. What you see is all there is a constriction of information, pretty much to the present, and that's all you know. Intensity matching is, we easily transfer attributes, which is important for substitution because we often substitute one question for another and then use the intensity matching from that second question that we substituted for the first one to give the actual answer for the second one. And then finally, we have the mood heuristic, which is that actually, I didn't say the mood heuristic, but the experiment with the Germans that your happiness is your answer of happiness changes based on if you're asked how many dates you've gone on, and then finally the affect heuristic, which is that people let their dislikes and emotions affect their decision making. Wow, that was a lot more than I even realized until I just a recap on it. So
Yeah, flew through them, but you guys can re-listen to the episode because that helps too.
always,
But you know what time it is.
it's time for a quote from Armelicus Milius.
And this time, one take. The focus on error does not denigrate human intelligence any more than the attention to diseases in medical texts denies good health. Daniel Kahneman. That one is, I like that quote because what he's saying is even though we make errors, even though we as humans have a bunch of errors in our decision making, that doesn't like take away from how smart or how intelligent or how good of a decision maker someone is, right? We all make mistakes. So just because there's diseases in the world does not mean that good health does not exist. Yeah, so I hope this episode made you think about how you think. So a lot of thinking to think about. So first we made you think about your life, then we made you think about how you think about your life and the decisions you make about your life. So it's a 2 months of just a lot of thinking.
That's what we do here at AOD. We think.
We think, we are thinkers, we are philosophers. Someday someone will call me a philosopher. With
Not
that
me.
being said, I don't listen to the haters. You know. That being said, you guys like, subscribe. Please leave us a review if you haven't already. We greatly appreciate that. Make sure you guys check out all the links below. With all that being said, till next week, peace.